Codex Astartes leaves no room for doubt. You cannot touch the warp and emerge unscathed.
The Codex Astartes is a set of rules. They guide us, shape us as Ultramarines, teach us to hold duty and honor sacred above all. But how we live with those rules is the true test of a Space Marine. And you have failed.
We all know Titus of the Ultramarines, once a respected firstborn captain of the glorious Second Company, now returned as a Primaris Lieutenant after enduring a century of interrogation, torture, and service within the Death Watch. Graia, Kadaku, Avrax, Zemirium, these worlds and more bear witness to his service. Time and time again, Titus succeeded where others failed, overcoming impossible odds and saving countless worlds and countless systems. He is a peerless warrior and strategist, a model of humility, a champion of honor and duty, a true son of Guilliman. But we also know of Leandros. Leandros, who fought side by side with Titus on Forge World Graia, who faced the same horrors, spilled the same blood, and slaughtered the same Xenos. Yet, when Titus took action, when he took the risks necessary to ensure victory, Leandros saw not heroism, but heresy. In his rigid, stubborn devotion to the Codex Astartes, Leandros perceived only corruption even when there was none. Blinded by doctrine and dogma, he betrayed his captain, summoning the dread hand of the Inquisition and delivering Titus into the bloodstained hands of Inquisitor Thrax of the Ordo Malleus. While Titus was torn apart and scourged by this machinery of suspicion, forgotten in the bowels of Thrax's watch station, Leandros climbed. His zeal and his fanatical adherence to the Codex eventually earning him the rank of company chaplain, a bitter irony for those who were there on Graia or for any who remembered Titus's many hard-fought campaigns. Now draped in the black robes of office and crowned with the skull helm of his station, Leandros preaches loyalty, duty, discipline, and honor to the very same company once led gloriously by Titus. And it leaves a bitter taste in the mouth, doesn't it? To see him, this poor backstabbing excuse of an Astartes, stand at the head of the company, lecturing novices and battle brothers alike on the virtues of loyalty and faith, while the true hero of Graia, the man who bore the weight of command and sacrificed everything for those under his command, languished in chains for decades for a crime for which he was wrongfully accused. Leandros, the man who twisted the teachings of the Codex to destroy his captain's life and reputation, now leads the prayers of the Second Company, instilling in them the same doctrines he once weaponized against Titus. And all the while, Titus, scarred but still committed, fights on, for his chapter, for his Primarch, for the Emperor. But why? Not why did Leandros summon the Inquisition on Graia. That much we can sort of understand. Leandros saw Titus's unorthodox approaches, he saw his captain endure what no Astartes should, and he relied upon what he knew, and what he trusted, to guide his thinking and to guide his actions. But why did Leandros interpret the Codex so narrowly, so zealously in the first place? Why did he feel compelled to make such a bold, damning, and ultimately wrong decision? Why does he seemingly still cling to those same suspicions when it comes to Titus even now? Well, I believe these answers lie in the orbit of the world Beta Arcturus. 10 years before the Orc invasion of Graia, before Titus's rise to the rank of captain, the Ultramarine Second Company was under the command of one Captain Lucian Trajan. It was Trajan who led the Ultramarines into the fires of Beta Arcturus, an imperial world choking beneath the foul presence of the Eldari from Craftworld Bieltan, those most wicked and cruel of their race. The Xenos had been bombarding the world from orbit for 8 days before the Ultramarines arrived, leaving most of the world's cities burning and the skies thick with ash and dust. The battle started and ended in orbit, with the Ultramarine strike cruiser Righteous Fury clashing with the sleek Wraithbone vessels of the Bieltan Azurani. As this Void War took place, Captain Trajan deployed a demi-company, some 50 warriors, to board the Bieltan flagship with characteristic Ultramarine precision, plunging into the heart of the conflict with fire and with fury to cut off the head of the snake, so to speak. Among the ranks of those to board was Sergeant Titus, his mettle already proven through decades of war, and brother Leandros, newly initiated and eager to prove himself. As the battle raged through the wraithbone decks of the flagship, Captain Trajan led the bulk of his force to locate the Eldari Autarch on the bridge, their leader. Upon doing so, Trajan engaged the Autarch in single combat, while Titus, Leandros and the captain's command squad and others held off the Autarch's bodyguards, with Titus himself cutting down a trio of aspect warriors, all while Trajan faced the Autarch alone, blade against blade. Trajan soon bested the Autarch, her lifeblood splattering against his blue plate as the Xenos forces reeled in disarray. With their leader dead, the Eldari ranks collapsed, but in the confusion that followed, the retreating Eldari captured the young Leandros as they withdrew to the bows of the ship. With Trajan's focus now divided, he entrusted command to Sergeant Titus, ordering him to secure the bridge while he led a handful of warriors in pursuit of the fleeing Eldari to recover Leandros. But too late did Trajan recognize the wicked cunning of the Xenos. They had anticipated this pursuit, laying an ambush using hosts of their forces that were yet to be committed to battle. Captain Trajan and his chosen warriors were ambushed, surrounded, and cut down without mercy by the Xenos, likely while the young Leandros watched helplessly. When word of the captain's fate reached him, Titus rallied the remnants of the Second Company, leading a counter-strike that was absolutely devastating. A hammer blow that shattered the Eldari forces, purging the last of the Xenos from the flagship as the rest of their wretched fleet burned in orbit. In the end, Beta Arcturus was saved, but the victory was bittersweet. Leandros was recovered, but so too was the broken, lifeless form of Captain Trajan. Put yourself into the mindset of Leandros after that battle. Not just physically wounded, but emotionally shattered and racked with incredible guilt. He is an Astartes warrior, an Ultramarine of the Second Company, a post-human who has been made, trained and conditioned to be the perfect soldier to fight in the Emperor's name, and yet in this moment, he is a failure. His captain and his brothers lie dead, slaughtered trying to save him. The newly appointed Captain Titus, a beacon of hope and guidance for the seriously mauled company, would have undoubtedly recognized the turmoil festering within Leandros. He would understand that if this pain, this shame, this self-recrimination was left unchecked, it could break the young warrior or worse. And so Titus sought to mold Leandros' shame and guilt into a catalyst for personal growth. Some even say that Titus saw real potential in Leandros. They say he didn't see the broken remnants of a brother shattered by the price of Beta Arcturus, rather he saw a blank slate that could be honed into a paragon of Ultramarine ideals. They say that Titus took Leandros under his wing, fostering him as a protege and going so far as to assign him to his own command squad, alongside Sidonus, the grizzled veteran sergeant, whose presence was both a steadying influence and a blunt, constant reminder of what it meant to be an Astartes. And yet, as we see Leandros on Graia a decade after the Pyrrhic victory at Beta Arcturus, Titus's efforts, well-intentioned as they were, seem to have failed, or maybe were never truly understood, for it is clear that Leandros did not absorb the lessons that Titus hoped to impart. He did not find peace in the notion of personal growth, nor did he seek redemption and improvement through the captain's guidance. Instead, Leandros retreated into the cold, clinical structure of the codex. Where Titus embodied pragmatism, flexibility, and adaptability, Leandros clung to the rigid doctrines of the codex. In the written words of his Primarch, he sought shelter. If his every action, every decision was dictated by the codex, then Leandros would never again have to face the terrifying possibility of making a wrong decision. He would never again be thrust into a situation beyond his control. He would never again have to feel the weight of responsibility for the lives of his brothers resting upon his shoulders, those lives would instead rest upon the shoulders of his Primarch through the sacred written word of the Codex. Leandros clearly came to the conclusion that every action must be executed in meticulous obedience to the Codex. Any brother who strayed from its teachings, therefore, became a potential threat to the sanctity of their chapter and their duty to the Emperor. And yet, the more Leandros retreated into the Codex and the more deep-rooted this sentiment became, the more disconnected he would in turn become from the very brothers he sought to protect. His loyalty shifted from his fellow warriors to the dogma itself. He scrutinized the actions of his battle brothers with suspicion, especially those who, like Titus, were fond of unorthodox methods. Ultimately, I believe it was this belief in his own interpretation of righteousness, his singular vision of what it meant to be an Ultramarine, to be an Astartes, that drove Leandros to report Captain Titus to the Inquisition, convinced of the captain's corruption by chaos as witnessed through his immunity or resistance to the warp's touch, both from the Chaos Lord Nemeroth and from the unshielded power source. The irony, of course, is not lost on me, for in doing so, Leandros broke the very codex he lived by. For according to its teachings, such matters should have been brought to the company chaplain first, not to the Inquisition. But in that moment, Leandros' eagerness to purge anything that smelled of heresy, of non-compliance, overshadowed even his own knowledge of the codex. His fear of what Titus represented, potential corruption or maybe just an erosion of the rigid order Leandros clearly loved so much, seemingly overruled the very tenets he dedicated himself to uphold. Anyway, for many Astartes, the Codex is indeed a guide. It is a means to ensure success and a method to safeguard their brothers and to execute the Emperor's will. But for Leandros, the Codex is more. It is a lifeboat, something to cling to with such fervour that it drowns out any whisper of doubt, of critical thought. One might even argue that Leandros employs the Codex as a smokescreen, a way to hide from the truth of his past, from the memory of the brother who was unceremoniously captured by Xenos, whose failures led to the deaths of his captain and of his brothers. By living the Codex, Leandros wants to rewrite his legacy, not as the novice who failed and who made others pay for that failing, but as the steadfast, unquestioning Puritan, the one who lives and dies by the word of Guilliman alone. So with this in mind, who better to bear the mantle of chaplaincy, to be the company's spiritual guide, than the brother who has spent decades deep in the Codex, not just following it, but living it? Who else, if not the warrior who understands intimately the weight of failure, the sting of guilt, and the pursuit of redemption? Leandros is not just a devotee of the Codex, he is living proof of its power to transform, to take a broken, flawed warrior and reshape him into something more. He is the embodiment of faith, faith in the words of his Primarch, faith in the rules that govern and guide the lives of Astartes, and faith that through discipline, loyalty, and devotion, all wrongs can be righted. Love him or hate him, his intimate understanding of what it means to fall short makes him the perfect candidate to remind his brothers that they too must relentlessly strive to meet the impossible standards set by the Codex. But beneath his devotion to the Codex and to the Emperor, beneath that skull mask of brutal righteousness, I believe there is something else driving Leandros. Probably pride, maybe arrogance, or maybe jealousy. It has become quite clear that Leandros' relationship with Titus is not a simple one. He could tell himself, and maybe even convince others, that his report to the Inquisition on Graia was made out of pure loyalty to the Codex and duty to the company and to the chapter. But in reality, I think it was more than that, and I think that was made quite clear at the end of the Demarian campaign in his words of warning to Titus. I believe that Titus's continued and recognized successes, the respect he gains with those he fights beside, his commitment and sense of duty and honor despite overwhelming odds, his ability to lead without blindly relying on the sacred teachings of the Codex, gnaws at Leandros. The very notion that Titus could continue to thrive and receive commendation and praise without blind adherence to the codex is an affront to everything Leandros holds dear, a challenge to the bedrock of his identity as an Ultramarine. Leandros needs Titus to fail, not just for the sake of the company or the chapter, but for his own sake. He needs to prove to his brothers, and probably far more importantly to himself, that the codex is the only true path, the only salvation. In Leandros' eyes, Titus has to be corrupt. He has to be wrong. Because if he isn't, if Titus' successes could be attributed to anything outside the codex, then everything Leandros has built his life on is called into question. His mistakes and his misjudgments wouldn't be accidents, they would be his responsibility, his burden to bear. So I expect Chaplain Leandros to monitor Titus closely as promised. Every unconventional but necessary tactic, every decision made in the heat of battle that doesn't fall within the confines of Leandros' black and white worldview will likely be seen as confirmation of what he's always suspected. And when that moment comes, you can be certain that Leandros won't hesitate. He will leap at the opportunity to discipline Titus himself, if that authority even still remains in his hands on this mission, and if it doesn't, well, I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to drag the Inquisition back into the picture, keen to cast Titus out once again before Calgar or anyone else with any sense can step in to defend him. Because you see, in the end, it really isn't about just proving Titus wrong, it's about proving himself right. And that is why Leandros is, and always will be, a little bitch. Anyway, thanks for watching. Dystopian Chimp, out.